The flash pops in a Greenbrier County farmhouse, and when the negative develops, three faces wear crowns they never put on. What begins as a novelty, strange halos circling the Miller family in every photograph, will unravel into something far older than emulsion and silver nitrate, something that refuses to stay buried in the Appalachian soil. Spring, 1954. The air in Lewisburg, West Virginia, carries the scent of wet limestone and coal dust, the kind that settles into your lungs whether you work the mines or just live downwind. The Miller farmhouse sits 3 miles east of town, where the ridge breaks into rolling pasture. White clapboard, tin roof catching afternoon sun. Nothing remarkable except what happens when you point a camera at the family inside. Thomas Miller notices it first, not in the moment the shutter clicks, but 6 days later when he collects the prints from Howell's drugstore on Washington Street. His wife, Margaret, stands in the kitchen doorway of photo number 4, holding a mixing bowl. Their son, David, age 7, crouches beside the porch steps in photo number 9, and in every single frame, a luminous ring hovers above their heads, not quite touching the hair, not quite separate from the image itself. Thomas shows the clerk, a man named Vic Howell who has been developing film in that basement darkroom since 1946. Vic squints through his bifocals, holds the prints to the window light, and shrugs. Bad batch of Kodak, probably. Happens when the emulsion overheats in transport. Thomas orders a second roll. Different camera this time. A Brownie Hawkeye borrowed from his brother-in-law. Same setup, same poses. Margaret by the stove. David with his wooden truck. Thomas himself captured by Margaret, standing in the barn doorway with a hay rake over one shoulder. The halos come back darker. Now here's where curiosity becomes unease. Margaret Miller keeps a diary, leather-bound, pages thin as onion skin, and her entry for May 11th reads, "Took David to Dr. Carver. Asked about the photographs. He laughed. Said we've been standing too close to the radio tower on Swago Mountain. I didn't tell him we're 15 miles from any tower. Dr. Carver's dismissal is the first in a pattern. When people see something they can't explain, they either invent a plausible lie or they stop looking. The Millers, for 3 weeks, choose the latter. They stop taking pictures. They avoid mirrors longer than necessary. David asks why the camera stays in the drawer, and Margaret tells him it's broken. But light has a memory. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city and the time in the comments. I want to know how far these stories travel, and if you're already hooked, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next makes the photographs look tame. June 9th. Thomas is repairing fence posts along the southern property line when he pulls his pocket watch to check the hour. The watch, a Hamilton Railroad special, gift from his father, accurate to within 30 seconds a month, reads 4:17 p.m. He glances at the sun, still high and western, checks again, 4:16. He taps the crystal, 4:15. The second hand sweeps counterclockwise. He stands there, wire cutters in one hand, watching time run backward. Not smoothly, it stutters, hesitates, leaps. 4:10, 4:03, 3:58. Then it stops entirely, the second hand quivering at the 12. Thomas walks back to the house without finishing the fence. That night, Margaret finds him at the kitchen table, the watch disassembled into tiny gears and springs. It's not broken, he says quietly. The mechanism is perfect. It just doesn't want to go forward anymore. She touches his shoulder. Her hand is cold. Outside, the June crickets have gone silent. The local explanation, when Thomas mentions it to his brother-in-law the following Sunday, involves magnetism. "You got too close to the tractor engine while it was running," the brother-in-law says, confident. "Scrambled the mainspring." But the tractor is a 1948 Farmel that runs on gasoline and cast iron, nothing that could reverse a timepiece from 15 feet away. Thomas doesn't argue. He's learning that people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, David begins waking at 3 a.m., standing at his bedroom window, staring toward the tree line. Margaret finds him there twice in 1 week. "What are you looking at?" she whispers so as not to wake Thomas. "The people in the woods," David says. "They have lights on their heads too." A standalone line lands here like a stone in still water. They were never alone. By late June, the Millers stop inviting neighbors over. When the pastor visits unannounced, Margaret makes excuses at the door. David has a fever, Thomas is in town, the house is a mess. The pastor, Reverend Ames, peers past her into the dim hallway. "You folks all right, Margaret? You look tired." She closes the door before he finishes the thought. But Reverend Ames isn't the only one noticing. At the post office, the clerk mentions that the Millers' mail is piling up. At the general store, the owner remarks that Thomas hasn't bought feed in 2 weeks. Small-town surveillance, the kind that masquerades as concern. And beneath it all, a question nobody speaks aloud. What happens to a family when the light around them stops behaving like light should? The answer begins to develop, like a photograph in chemical bath. When a traveling salesman named Edward Finch knocks on the Miller door in early July, selling encyclopedias and vacuum cleaners. Margaret doesn't buy anything, but she lets him take a picture for his company portfolio. The satisfied customer, the wholesome farmhouse. Finch's camera jams mid-roll. The shutter won't release. He apologizes, leaves. That night, back in his motel room in Lewisburg, he opens the camera to reload. Every frame on the roll has fogged to black, even the ones he shot before arriving at the Miller place. And in the center of each ruined negative, if you hold it to the light just right, there's a shape. 3 shapes, wearing halos that glow faint and cold, like phosphorescence on deep-sea fish. Edward Finch doesn't report the ruined film to his supervisor. He burns it in the motel parking lot at dawn and tells no one. Because admitting what you saw means accepting that some places don't follow the rules, and Finch has 300 miles of territory to cover before quarterly review. July 15th, 1954. The Greenbrier County Library keeps records in a basement that smells of mildew and yellowing newsprint, where the floorboards creak in a rhythm that suggests settling but might be something else. Mrs. Adelaide Kincaid, head librarian for 22 years, notices Margaret Miller at the microfiche reader every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 consecutive weeks. Always the same machine. Always the local obituaries, dating back to 1897. "Looking for family history?" Mrs. Kincaid asks, more from professional habit than genuine curiosity. Margaret doesn't look up from the glowing screen. "Looking for patterns." She doesn't elaborate. Mrs. Kincaid doesn't press. But after Margaret leaves, always at exactly 4:30 p.m., always through the side exit, Mrs. Kincaid checks the machine's viewing history. The pages Margaret studied most carefully weren't obituaries at all. They were land surveys, mineral rights disputes, and a single article from November 9th, 1903, about a cave-in at the Arbuckle mine that killed 11 men and was never properly excavated. The mine sat directly beneath what would become, 51 years later, the Miller family property. Back at the farmhouse, Thomas discovers something else about the pocket watch. When he holds it near the kitchen radio, a Philco table model that picks up Charleston stations on clear nights, The broadcast distorts. Not static, not interference. The voices slow down, deepen, until the words become unrecognizable. Then, just before the watch stops ticking altogether, the radio plays something that wasn't on any frequency Thomas has ever tuned. Children singing. A melody he almost recognizes but can't place. David hears it from upstairs and calls down, "That's the song from the woods." Margaret and Thomas exchange a glance that contains an entire conversation neither wants to speak aloud. The halos were a warning. What would you do if the tools you trusted, cameras, clocks, radios, started translating a message you weren't supposed to receive? The Millers, like most people caught between skepticism and terror, choose a middle path. They document without acting. Margaret begins her own log, separate from her diary. Entries are clinical, almost scientific. July 18th, watch ran backward for 11 minutes. Kitchen temperature dropped 8 degrees during episode. David, heard singing again. No visible source. July 22nd, attempted photograph with Polaroid camera borrowed from church. Image developed blank except for 3 oval shapes. Shapes matched positions where we stood. July 24th, Thomas found dead birds on western fence line. 14 total. No marks. Eyes open. She doesn't write what she's thinking, which is that the house feels crowded even when they're alone. That the air pressure changes at sunset. That David has started speaking to empty rooms in a language that sounds almost like English, but uses words in the wrong order. By August, the neighbors stop pretending not to notice. The Harrisons, who farm the adjacent property, mention to Reverend Ames that the Miller place feels wrong after dark. The Reverend, a practical man who believes in soil chemistry and proper drainage more than he believes in ghosts, drives out on a Thursday afternoon. He brings a Bible and a Kodak Retina, the kind of camera that cost him 2 weeks' salary. Thomas meets him at the property line, not the porch. "Appreciate the visit, Reverend, but we're managing fine. Your wife hasn't been to service in 6 weeks. Your boy missed Sunday school 4 times running." "Busy season." Thomas doesn't blink. Reverend Ames raises the camera. "Mind if I take a picture? For the parish newsletter. Local families serving the community. That sort of thing." Thomas steps forward, close enough that the Reverend can smell the sweat and fear on him. "I mind very much." The Reverend lowers the camera. He wants to argue, wants to invoke pastoral duty, but something in Thomas Miller's eyes, a flatness, a distance, makes him retreat to his Chevrolet without another word. As he drives away, he glances in the rearview mirror. All 3 Millers stand in the yard now, though he only saw Thomas a moment ago. They're motionless, watching. And even through the dusty mirror and the afternoon glare, Reverend Ames swears he sees something like light circling their heads. He doesn't come back. A pattern interrupts here, a statistic that matters. In Greenbrier County between 1950 and 1960, 12 families reported photographic anomalies to the Charleston Bureau of Standards. Only one, the Millers, reported multiple occurrences across different cameras and film stocks. The other 11 were dismissed as operator error or defective equipment. No follow-up investigations were conducted. No files were kept beyond initial reports. The bureaucracy of denial is as old as photography itself. August 7th. Margaret finds David in the basement, standing on an overturned crate, pressing his ear against the stone foundation. "They're louder down here," he says without turning around. "They want to show us something." "Who does, sweetheart?" "The ones who got stuck when the light changed." Margaret pulls him away from the wall, but not before she hears it too. A sound like tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere beneath the house. Morse code, maybe, or something older. That night, Thomas takes a sledgehammer to the basement floor. Margaret doesn't stop him. David watches from the stairs, humming the song from the woods. The concrete cracks on the fourth swing, revealing not earth, but a hollow space. Cold air rises from the gap, carrying the smell of mineral water and something else. Something organic that stopped decomposing decades ago. Thomas drops the sledgehammer. The sound echoes longer than it should, as if the basement has suddenly grown much larger than its walls suggest. They don't tell anyone about the hollow. What would they say? That their house sits atop a void? That the void hums at frequencies just below human hearing? That when Thomas shines a flashlight into the gap, the beam bends at an angle that violates every principle of optics he learned in high school? Instead, they cover the crack with a sheet of plywood and a rug. They pretend the basement doesn't exist. They sleep upstairs with the doors locked, though they know locks won't help. Because whatever is happening to the Miller family isn't coming from outside. It's developing from within, like an image in chemical bath, one layer of silver halide at a time. A photographer in Charleston receives a package with no return address. Inside, 4 Miller family negatives and a note that reads simply, "Explain this." He can't. And within 48 hours of attempting to print them, every bulb in his darkroom shatters in sequence, left to right, like dominoes made of glass. August 12, 1954. The county clerk's office in Lewisburg occupies the second floor of a limestone building that has smelled of ink and bureaucracy since 1867. Here, in file cabinet G through M, sits the deed to the Miller property, 83 acres purchased by Thomas's grandfather in 1921 from the Consolidated Coal and Coke Company. The sale was recorded as surface rights only, a common notation in mining country where mineral extraction continues long after the last pickaxe leaves the ground. What isn't common is the addendum, typed on different paper and dated 6 months after the original transaction. Purchaser acknowledges property includes sealed shaft of Arbuckle Mine, abandoned 1903. No excavation or disturbance of seal permitted under penalty of contract nullification and forfeiture. Thomas's grandfather never mentioned a seal, never spoke of the mine at all. When he died in 1947, the knowledge died with him, or so the family believed. But the hollow beneath the basement suggests otherwise, suggests that some seals don't hold, that time and pressure and the slow shift of bedrock eventually betray even the most careful containment. Margaret stops sleeping. Not figuratively, literally stops. For 72 consecutive hours, she sits in the kitchen with a notebook, recording everything. Temperature fluctuations down to 41 degrees at 2 a.m. Electromagnetic readings from Thomas's handheld voltmeter, spiking to 17 volts in rooms with no wiring. And the intervals between David's nighttime wanderings, every 93 minutes, precise as a metronome. Her handwriting deteriorates as the nights progress. By hour 60, the letters slant and overlap. By hour 70, she's writing in the margins, upside down, filling every inch of paper with observations that blur the line between data and confession. They were trying to get out. That's what the foreman's report said. The one I found in the library microfiche. 11 men trapped when the shaft collapsed. They dug toward the surface for 3 days before the air ran out. The company sealed the entrance rather than recover the bodies. Said it was too dangerous, too expensive. 11 men whose last act was digging toward light they'd never reach. Is that what leaves a mark? The direction you were moving when you died? Light doesn't forget. Thomas finds her asleep at the table on the morning of August 15th, her head resting on pages covered in drawings she doesn't remember making. Geometric patterns, concentric circles, and at the center of each, a simple human figure with a halo. Not cartoonish, anatomically precise, as if traced from a photograph. He doesn't wake her. Instead, he walks to the basement with the voltmeter and a ball of twine. He ties one end to the railing, drops the other through the crack in the floor. The twine descends 12 feet before going slack. He pulls it back up. The bottom 6 inches are wet. Not with water, but with something thicker. Viscous. It smells like copper and rotted wood. Thomas leaves the twine on the basement floor and goes upstairs to call his brother-in-law. The phone line is dead. Not disconnected. Dead. When he lifts the receiver, there's no dial tone, no static. Just a faint sound like breathing, rhythmic and patient. He hangs up carefully, as if the phone might bite. David stops going outside. Won't say why, just shakes his head when Margaret suggests playing in the yard. She doesn't push. The truth is, she's relieved. Because 3 days ago, she looked out the kitchen window and saw him standing at the tree line, talking to someone she couldn't see. And when he came back inside, his shoes left prints that glowed faintly on the linoleum. Faint enough to doubt, bright enough to notice. The prints faded after 20 minutes. The doubt didn't. Here's where denial becomes complicity. The Harrisons, the pastor, even the mailman, everyone who passes the Miller property can feel that something is wrong. The air tastes metallic. Dogs won't walk past the fence line. Crows gather on the roof at dusk, silent and watchful, more like sentinels than scavengers. But nobody knocks on the door. Nobody calls the sheriff. Because acknowledging the wrongness means accepting responsibility for doing something about it. And what do you do when a family is haunted by light itself? Drive past. You look away. You tell yourself it's not your business. And in that silence, that collective decision to ignore, the phenomenon deepens. August 18th, a field researcher from West Virginia University, a man named Dr. Ellis Granger, who studies atmospheric anomalies and unexplained electromagnetic events, reads a letter forwarded by Mrs. Kincaid, the librarian. The letter is from Margaret Miller. It describes the photographs, the pocket watch, the sounds from beneath the house. It ends with a single question. Is it possible for light to carry memory? Dr. Granger, a skeptic by training and temperament, normally discards such letters. But something about the precision of Margaret's description, the technical details, the measured tone, compels him to respond. He writes back, asking for samples, a photograph, a measurement of the basement temperature gradient, anything quantifiable. Margaret never receives the letter. It sits in the Lewisburg post office for 6 days before being returned to Dr. Granger with a stamp that reads, "Addressee unknown." But the Millers still live there. The postman confirms it. He just won't deliver to the house anymore. Says the mailbox feels wrong when he opens it. Says he can hear ticking when he stands too close to the property line, even though nobody out there wears a watch. The halo tightens. August 21st. Thomas makes a decision that will define everything that follows. He takes the sledgehammer back to the basement and widens the crack in the floor. Not to explore, to seal. He mixes concrete in a wheelbarrow, pours it into the gap, and smooths it with a trowel. The concrete steams as it settles, as if the hollow beneath is much warmer than the surrounding earth. As he works, he hears the tapping again. Morse code, he's now certain. He knows a little from his time in the Navy, enough to recognize the rhythm of SOS repeated endlessly. He pours faster. By midnight, the crack is sealed. The tapping stops. Thomas goes upstairs, washes his hands, and sits beside Margaret, who hasn't spoken in hours. "It's done," he says quietly. She looks at him with eyes that have seen too much and slept too little. "You think concrete will hold?" He doesn't answer, because they both know the truth. You can't seal away light. You can only trap it, compress it, until it finds another way out. And when it does, it burns brighter than before. Morning arrives on August 22nd, but the sun doesn't reach the Miller house. Not in the way it should. Not with the warmth and clarity that turns dew to mist. The light that falls on the white clapboard is thin, watery, as if passing through layers of something the eye can't quite detect. David wakes first. He's been waking first for weeks now. Always at 5:47 a.m., always with the certainty that someone called his name. This morning is different. This morning, when he opens his eyes, his bedroom ceiling glows. Not the pale wash of dawn through curtains. Actual luminescence, pooling in the plaster cracks like liquid captured in drought-dry riverbeds. He doesn't call for his parents. Instead, he climbs onto his desk chair and traces one of the glowing fissures with his fingertip. The light follows his touch, branching into new patterns, spreading across the ceiling in a network that resembles roots or veins or something between the two. Margaret finds him there 10 minutes later, standing on furniture, drawing constellations only he can see. "David, get down from there." He turns to her, and for just a moment, brief enough to doubt later, his eyes reflect the ceiling glow. Cat shine in a boy who should have none. "They're mapping," he says simply. "They need us to understand the shape." Margaret lifts him down without asking what shape, what understanding. She's learning that some questions invite answers you can't unhear. The concrete Thomas poured holds for 6 days. On the 7th day, August 28th, Margaret descends to the basement for preserves and finds the floor buckled. Not cracked, buckled, as if something beneath has pressed upward with enough force to warp 3 inches of cured concrete into a dome. The surface is hot to the touch. When she kneels and puts her ear against it, she hears what David heard weeks ago. Tapping, but faster now. Urgent. She runs upstairs and finds Thomas in the barn, repairing a harness that doesn't need repair. "It's coming through," she says, breathless. "Whatever you sealed, it's coming through anyway." Thomas sets down the leather and the awl. His hands, she notices, are shaking. "Then we leave." "Leave?" Margaret's voice climbs. "And go where?" "This follows us, Thomas. You know it does. Every photograph, every mirror, we carry it with us now." He knows she's right. Knows it the way you know a fever is rising before the thermometer confirms it. The halos aren't in the house. They're in the family. In their cells, their chemistry, the electrical impulses that fire between neurons and keep hearts beating. They've been exposed, developed, fixed in solution. You can't outrun your own image. September 1st, 1954. A delivery truck from Charleston arrives in Lewisburg carrying supplies for Howell's drugstore, including 40 rolls of Kodak Plus X film, fresh from the factory. Vic Howell unpacks them in his basement darkroom, a space he's carefully maintained for 8 years without incident. The safe light casts everything in red. The chemical trays wait in precise rows. Developer, stop bath, fixer. He processes his first customer's roll at 11 a.m. The images develop normally, A birthday party, a new Chevrolet, a woman holding a baby on a porch. He moves to the second roll, shot by a different customer at a different location. The negatives come out fogged, not blank. Fogged with three distinct shapes, humanoid and haloed, occupying the center of each frame regardless of what the photographer originally captured. Vic checks his chemistry, his temperatures, his timing. Everything is correct. He tries a third roll from a third customer. Same result. 3 figures, 3 halos. By noon, he's tested 14 rolls from 9 different customers, spanning 2 weeks of drop-off dates. Every single strip of film bears the same ghostly trinity, and when he examines them closely under magnification, he realizes something that empties his stomach. The figures aren't random. They're the Millers. Thomas, Margaret, David, burned into emulsion across the entire town's photographic memory. Vic closes the drugstore early. He doesn't tell anyone why. That evening, he drives past the Miller property on his way home, a route he normally avoids, and sees them in the yard. All 3 motionless, facing the road as if they knew he'd pass. Their halos are visible now, even without a camera, faint coronas in the twilight, like saints in medieval paintings or radiation victims in clinical photographs. Vic drives home and burns every negative in his darkroom. The smoke smells like copper and burnt hair. What would you do if your neighbor's affliction started bleeding into your life? If their wrongness became contagious, transmitted through light and silver and the simple act of looking? The people of Lewisburg face this question collectively and answer with the same human cowardice that has allowed atrocities in every century. They choose not to see. The sheriff receives 3 complaints about strange lights near the Miller farm. He files them under atmospheric phenomena and does nothing. The school calls Margaret to ask why David hasn't attended since August. She says he's ill. The school doesn't send a truancy officer. The county nurse, who is supposed to make welfare checks on families in crisis, schedules a visit for October 15th and then quietly cancels it, citing workload constraints. Everyone knows. Nobody acts. And in that vacuum of responsibility, the Miller family disappears in slow motion. September 9th. Dr. Ellis Granger, the atmospheric researcher, makes an unauthorized trip to Greenbrier County. His letter was returned, but his curiosity wasn't satisfied. He brings a Geiger counter, a magnetometer, and a Bell & Howell 16mm camera loaded with fresh film. He parks 300 yards from the Miller house, just before sunset. Through binoculars, he observes the family sitting on the porch, motionless, as if posing for a portrait that will never develop properly. He notes the visible halos, the way they pulse faintly in rhythm with something he can't identify. His instruments give conflicting readings. The Geiger counter silent, the magnetometer spiking to 18 Gauss and then dropping to 0 in erratic waves. He raises the Bell & Howell, frames the shot, presses the trigger. The camera's motor seizes immediately. The film inside begins to smoke. Actual smoke. Wisping from the camera body. Drops it in the grass and watches it melt from within, the metal casing too hot to touch. When he looks back at the porch, the Millers are gone. Not inside. Gone. The porch is empty. The door hasn't opened. Dr. Granger returns to his car, drives to Charleston, and writes a report he will never submit. It concludes with a single line. Some phenomena resist observation, not through physical law, but through ontological rejection, reality itself refusing to be documented. He stops studying atmospheric anomalies after that, takes a position teaching undergraduate chemistry, never speaks of the Miller family again. The light remembers better than we do. Inside the house, Margaret reads to David from a book neither of them chooses consciously anymore. Fairy tales, the Brothers Grimm, stories about children lost in woods and witches and ovens that burn at temperatures meant for transformation, not destruction. David listens, but his attention is elsewhere. On the walls, where shadows move without corresponding movement. On the windows, where handprints appear in condensation, though nobody has touched the glass. Thomas sits in the kitchen, the pocket watch disassembled again on the table. He's discovered that if he arranges the gears in a certain pattern, a spiral counterclockwise, they begin to tick without the mainspring. The sound is wrong, too fast and too hollow, but it keeps time. Backward time. Every 12-hour rotation subtracts a day from the calendar he maintains in his head. By his count, it's now July again, then June, then May. Soon, he thinks, they'll reach the beginning, the point before the first photograph, before the halos emerged. He doesn't consider what happens when you reach a beginning you've already passed, when you try to reverse a development that's already fixed. Some doors only open one direction, and some exposures are permanent. September 14th arrives, but inside the Miller house it feels like early spring. Cold floors, frost on the inside of windows, the damp chill of earth that hasn't seen sun in months. Time, it turns out, isn't the only thing running backward. The basement dome cracks open at 3:22 a.m. Not explosively, slowly like a hatching egg, the concrete peeling away in curved segments that fall inward rather than out. Margaret hears it from the kitchen, where she's been sitting for 6 hours, watching her breath fog in September warmth. The sound is organic, wet, deliberate, accompanied by a smell that combines mine dust with something sweeter. Decay at an angle, rot in reverse. She walks to the basement door, doesn't open it, just stands with her palm flat against the wood, feeling vibration that might be machinery or might be breath, rhythmic and patient. "Thomas?" she calls upstairs. "It's open." He comes down in undershirt and work pants, hair standing at angles, eyes red from sleeplessness that has stretched into its third week. Together they descend the basement stairs. The dome has split into 7 pieces, arranged in a perfect circle around a hole that descends farther than Thomas's flashlight beam can reach. The edges glow faintly, not reflected light, but intrinsic luminescence, the kind certain fungi produce in caves where sun has never penetrated. "We should cover it," Thomas says, though he doesn't move to do so. Margaret kneels at the edge, peers down. There's a ladder, metal rungs going down the shaft wall. From the mine. From the mine, she confirms. Neither of them asks the obvious question. Why is a ladder from 1903 still intact? Why does it shine as if recently polished? Why does the air rising from the shaft taste like ozone and copper and something else? Something that doesn't have a name in any language currently spoken. David appears at the top of the stairs, barefoot, wearing pajamas that Margaret washed yesterday, but that somehow look decades old, faded, threadbare at the seams. "They're ready now," he says. "They've been waiting a long time to show us." "Show us what, sweetheart?" Margaret's voice is steady in a way that requires enormous effort. "Where the light goes when it gets trapped." Burial is just storage. A pattern interrupt arrives via newspaper, though the Millers don't subscribe anymore and haven't collected mail in 3 weeks. Still, the September 15th edition of the Greenbrier Independent runs a small article on page 7. Local photographer closes shop. Victor Howell, proprietor of Howell's Drugstore and Developing Services, announced Tuesday the permanent closure of his photography business. Unpredictable equipment failures, cited as primary cause. The drugstore will continue operations, but film development will no longer be offered. Customers with pending orders should collect negatives by month's end. Prints cannot be guaranteed. The article doesn't mention that Vic hasn't slept properly since September 1st. Doesn't mention the nightmares where he develops the same roll of film endlessly, each print showing 3 figures growing closer to the camera, frame by frame, until their faces fill the entire image and their halos burn holes through the paper. Doesn't mention that his hands shake now whenever he sees anything resembling a camera. Some trauma is too specific to explain in newsprint. Thomas makes a decision born of exhaustion and something deeper, the kind of fatalism that arrives when you've been running from light and realize light moves faster than anything in the universe. On September 16th, just after dawn, he descends the basement ladder. Margaret doesn't stop him. David watches from the top of the stairs, humming the song from the woods, the one that sounds like children but uses intervals no children should know. The ladder descends 43 feet. Thomas counts, before his boots touch stone. The shaft opens into a chamber that his flashlight can't fully illuminate, a space too large for the geology of the ridge, too deliberately carved to be natural. The walls are scored with tool marks, pickaxe and drill, but also something else. Symbols. Not carved, but burned into the rock, precise and repeating. Circles within circles. Human figures with radiating lines where heads should be. The same patterns Margaret drew in her notebook during the 72 hours she didn't sleep. At the chamber's center, 11 skeletons, arranged in a circle facing outward. Their bones glow with the same faint luminescence as the shaft walls. Each skull is fractured at the crown, not from trauma, but from something internal, something that pushed outward through the bone and left edges that curve like flower petals. Thomas stands among them, these men who died digging toward light they never reached, and understands with sudden clarity. They didn't suffocate. They were transformed. The company didn't seal the shaft to prevent recovery. They sealed it to prevent escape. His flashlight flickers. When it steadies, the skeletons are closer. Not moved, closer, as if space itself has compressed. The halos around their skulls pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Thomas runs for the ladder. He emerges from the basement, gasping, pulls David away from the door, finds Margaret in the kitchen staring at her hands. "We have to burn it," he says. "The house, everything. It's the only way." "Burn it," Margaret repeats, toneless. "The mine, the shaft? It's not geology, Margaret. It's not natural. Those men, they were changed down there. And whatever changed them is still active, still developing, and we're—" He stops, searching for words that might contain the truth without breaking under its weight. "We're the next exposure." Margaret turns her hands palm up, studying the lines. "Look," she says quietly. Her fingerprints glow, faint whirls of light tracing the unique pattern that makes her specifically Margaret Miller, photographically identifiable, biologically distinct. As Thomas watches, the glow intensifies, spreads to her palms, her wrists, crawling up her forearms like bioluminescent algae in a tide pool. "It's already developed," she says. "We're already fixed." "You can't burn light." David speaks from the doorway, voice dreamy and distant. "The men in the mine found something older than the coal, something that came up with the dig. They thought it was ore. They called the company, said they'd struck a vein worth millions, but it wasn't metal. It was memory. Compressed memory from everything that died to make the coal. Forests, animals, oceans from when this was all underwater. 100 million years of dying pressed into a seam 6 inches wide. And when they broke it open, David. Margaret moves toward him. It remembered them back, photographed them at the cellular level, every atom. And once you're photographed by something that old, by that much accumulated death, you can't be unphotographed. You're part of the record now. You're developed. Thomas looks at his son, 7 years old, second-grade education, vocabulary that shouldn't include words like cellular or accumulated, and sees someone looking back through David's eyes, not possessing, translating, using David's vocal cords to deliver a message from geology itself. Who's speaking? Thomas asks. David's smile is wrong, too wide, too knowing. Everyone who stayed in the dark long enough to become the dark. We're the emulsion, Mr. Miller. You're just the image forming on us. September 20th. The county records clerk, a woman named Patricia Vance, who has filed deeds and titles for 19 years without questioning their contents, reviews the Miller property file one final time. She's not sure why. Professional thoroughness, maybe. Or the dream she had 3 nights running where someone taps on her office window from outside, even though her office is on the 2nd floor. She finds something she missed before. A surveyor's note from 1920, 1 year before Thomas's grandfather purchased the land. The note, handwritten in margins too small for easy reading, describes unusual photographic degradation in all documentation attempts. Plates fog, regardless of exposure time or chemical process. Recommend property boundary verification through alternate means. The surveyor's name is listed as Edmund Albright. Patricia checks the county death records on impulse she can't explain. Edmund Albright died October 3rd, 1921, 7 months after writing that note. Cause of death: spontaneous combustion, origin undetermined. The incident report notes that his body was found in his home office, reduced to ash except for his hands, which remained perfectly intact and bore unusual luminous markings on the palms. Patricia closes the file, goes home, submits her resignation the following morning, citing personal health concerns. She moves to Ohio within the month. Never sets foot in Greenbrier County again. The final photograph of the Miller family is taken by no one. The camera triggers itself at 11:37 p.m. on September 23rd, sitting on the kitchen table where Thomas left it 3 weeks prior. The flash illuminates 3 figures who haven't moved in 4 hours, haven't blinked, haven't drawn breath that Margaret can consciously feel anymore. September 24th, 1954. The neighbor, Hank Harrison, who farms the adjacent 80 acres and hasn't spoken directly to the Millers since mid-August, walks his property line at dawn as he's done every morning for 12 years. The ritual is agricultural, checking fence posts, watching for groundhog holes, noting which sections need attention before winter. But this morning, the ritual breaks. The fence separating Harrison land from Miller land is glowing, not metaphorically. Each wooden post, each strand of wire, emanates soft blue-white light like foxfire on rotted wood, except the fence is new cedar, replaced just last spring. Harrison approaches slowly, extending one hand. The moment his fingertips make contact, he sees them. 3 figures standing in the Miller yard, 40 feet away, facing his direction. Thomas, Margaret, David. Their halos are no longer faint suggestions. They're architectural, solid rings of light 3 feet in diameter, hovering 18 inches above their heads, rotating slowly like celestial mechanics in a planetarium demonstration. As Harrison watches, frozen, The halos pulse once in unison. Every bulb in his farmhouse, 200 yards behind him, shatters simultaneously. He runs, doesn't stop until he's in his truck, engine started, driving toward Lewisburg. He'll tell the sheriff, has to tell the sheriff. This isn't folklore or superstition. This is visible, this is real. This requires intervention by someone with authority and answers. But when he reaches town and tries to explain what he witnessed, the words rearrange themselves in his mouth. What comes out? The Miller place needs checking on, maybe. Bland, insufficient. The truth stays lodged in his throat like a stone too large to swallow or spit. He drives home, never walks that fence line again. Testimony fails where witnesses succeed. Inside the house, Margaret sits at the kitchen table with her notebook open to a blank page. She's been staring at it for 3 hours, pen in hand, unable to remember what she meant to write. The hours fold differently now. Seconds stretch into minutes. Minutes collapse into moments. The clock on the wall ticks in patterns that spell words in Morse if you know how to listen. David is in the basement. Has been since yesterday afternoon, sitting at the edge of the open shaft, legs dangling into darkness, conducting conversations with the 11 men who died in 1903. Except they're not conversations, they're translations. The dead speaking through geological memory, David receiving and repeating, Margaret hearing fragments that drift up through the floorboards. Tried to seal it, but you can't seal light. The company knew. They knew before the collapse. Takes 11 to open, takes 3 to close. But closing isn't stopping. Closing is just... The sentence doesn't finish. Or Margaret loses the ability to hear it. Or time skips forward, and the words were spoken an hour ago, but are only arriving now, delayed by the thickening air. Thomas stands in the doorway between kitchen and living room, pocket watch in hand, watching the second-hand circle counterclockwise through months he's already lived. According to the watch, it's now March 1954. The photographs haven't been taken yet. The halos haven't appeared. But he can feel them anyway, present in his cells like latent images waiting for developer. You can't prevent what's already exposed. You can only wait for it to become visible. Thomas, Margaret says without looking at him. How long has it been since we ate? He doesn't know. Days, maybe. Or hours, that feel like days because duration has become subjective, measured not in clock time, but in degrees of transformation. His stomach doesn't feel empty. His body doesn't feel hungry. It feels like something other than his body, a vessel being prepared for different contents. I'm not sure it matters anymore, he says. Margaret nods, sets down the pen. I think we're nearly developed. September 27th. Dr. Ellis Granger receives a phone call at his Charleston office from a man identifying himself as Colonel Raymond Cass, U.S. Air Force, Office of Special Investigations. The colonel's voice is professionally neutral, the kind of neutral that comes from delivering classified briefings to generals and congressmen. He asks Dr. Granger about his September 9th visit to Greenbrier County, asks specifically about the Miller family, about instruments, measurements, observations. I didn't file a report, Dr. Granger says carefully. We know. That's why we're asking verbally, unofficially. Then, unofficially. I observed a phenomenon I cannot explain using conventional physics. Light behavior that violates inverse square law. Electromagnetic readings suggesting a source that doesn't correspond to any known geological or artificial. Did you enter the property? No. Did you have physical contact with any member of the family? No. A pause. Paper rustling. Then, Dr. Granger, you're going to receive a letter from the Department of the Interior advising that the area in question has been designated a Mineral Resource Study Zone. Access will be restricted. We recommend you focus your research elsewhere. Recommend or require? Recommend very strongly, for your own safety. The line goes dead before Dr. Granger can respond. The letter arrives 3 days later, signed by officials whose names appear in no government directory. The restricted zone encompasses 2 square miles centered on the Miller property. No justification provided. No timeline for lifting restrictions. Dr. Granger files the letter and never speaks of it. But late at night, when sleep won't come, he calculates. If light can carry memory, and memory can imprint on matter, how many generations of dead forests and dead oceans and dead civilizations are compressed beneath West Virginia? And what happens when you dig them up? When you break the seal and let 100 million years of accumulated death flood back into the present? He doesn't write these thoughts down. Some questions exist only to haunt you. The image resolves. October 1st, the last sunrise the Miller family watches is pale yellow, watery, filtered through morning fog that hasn't lifted in 4 days. They stand in the yard, all 3 positions never discussed but somehow coordinated, facing east. Their halos are solid now, opaque, bright enough to cast shadows even in direct sunlight. Thomas's halo rotates clockwise, Margaret's counterclockwise. David's remains stationary but pulses, dim, bright, like a lighthouse beam cutting through dark that shouldn't exist at 10 a.m. If anyone were watching from the road, and nobody is because everyone has learned not to look, they would see the exact composition of a photograph that hasn't been taken yet. A family portrait, perfectly framed, subjects positioned for optimal exposure. Thomas left, Margaret right, David center. Background, white farmhouse, tin roof, ridge rising to mountains beyond. Foreground, earth that has stopped supporting normal growth. Grass turned silver. Soil that sparkles with mineral content that wasn't there last spring. The shutter clicks, not from a camera, from reality itself, capturing them, fixing them, making them permanent in a medium that outlasts film and paper and human memory. David speaks. It's finished now. Thomas asks, what is? The photograph. We're inside it. We've been inside it since August 8th at 7:13 p.m., but the development takes time, especially for living subjects. But now we're fully fixed. Now we're permanent. Margaret closes her eyes. When she opens them, they reflect light at the wrong angle, producing eye shine where none should exist in human anatomy. Will it hurt? David considers. I don't think so. The men in the mine say it's like becoming very cold, and then becoming the cold itself. A transition, not an ending. I don't want this, Margaret whispers. I know, Mama, but photographs don't need permission. They just need light and time and chemistry, and we've had all 3. The military arrives on October 3rd. 2 trucks, 12 personnel, no insignia, civilian clothes that fit too uniformly to be genuine civilian attire. They cordon the property with chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Post signs, danger, unstable geological formation, no trespassing, violators subject to federal prosecution. The Miller house stands empty when they arrive. Doors open, lights on. Breakfast dishes in the sink, food still on plates, as if the family stepped away mid-meal and simply never returned. In the basement, the shaft opening glows. The military personnel lower instruments on cables, take readings, samples, photographs. Every photograph develops blank. Every instrument returns corrupted data. After 6 hours, they seal the basement door with welded steel plates and leave. The house remains. Electricity stays connected. Nobody comes to collect belongings or file missing persons reports, because officially, the Miller family never existed. No birth certificates, no tax records, no deed of sale. The paper trail dissolves under scrutiny, as if bureaucracy itself is rejecting their history. Only the negatives remain. 4 strips of film in a safety deposit box in Charleston, held by a photographer who died in 1961. The box isn't opened until 1993, by which time the negatives have deteriorated to the point where only 3 shapes are visible: humanoid, haloed, eternal. October 17th, 2024, 70 years after the first photograph, and the Miller property still refuses cameras. This is where evidence becomes legend, where documentation meets the point where reality prefers not to be recorded. The fence is gone now, removed by the county in 1989 after the geological study was quietly abandoned with no public findings. The house collapsed in 1997, foundation failure according to the structural report. Though no engineer could explain why the concrete crumbled in perfect geometric patterns, circles within circles, like photographic apertures closing in stone. What remains? A field of silver grass that grows nowhere else in West Virginia. An indentation where the basement once opened into deeper geology. And a phenomenon that local teenagers discover approximately every 5 years when they attempt what every generation attempts: documenting the forbidden. In 2008, 3 high school students brought digital cameras, every file corrupted, not deleted, corrupted, displaying 3 human figures with rings of light where heads should be. In 2014, a paranormal investigation team arrived with infrared equipment and electromagnetic sensors. Their footage shows nothing but static, but if you isolate the audio and slow it down by 60%, you hear a child's voice counting backward from 11 in a language that sounds like English played in reverse. In 2019, a documentary crew from Pittsburgh spent 4 hours on the property. Their cameras functioned normally, but when they returned to their hotel and reviewed the footage, every frame was overexposed, white out, total luminance, as if the light had been increasing exponentially with each passing minute they filmed. The crew's eyes ached for 3 days afterward. One member reported seeing halos around strangers' heads for a week, faint but unmistakable, before her vision returned to normal. She sold her cameras, switched careers, now teaches elementary school, and never discusses what she saw or didn't see on a September afternoon in West Virginia. Some places remain photographed. Mrs. Adelaide Kincaid, the librarian who helped Margaret Miller research the mine collapse, died in 1976 at age 83. Her obituary mentioned 40 years of public service and a deep love of local history. It didn't mention the box she left to the county archive, labeled Miller File Do Not Circulate. Inside, Margaret's handwritten logs, photocopies of the mine disaster article from November 1903, and a sealed envelope with instructions not to open until 2054. 100 years after the events. The archivist who processed the donation in 1977 opened the envelope anyway. Professional curiosity, against explicit instruction but within human nature. Inside, a single page in Mrs. Kincaid's handwriting. If you're reading this before 2054, you've made the same mistake I did, assuming some knowledge should be accessible. It shouldn't. The Miller family discovered something that human consciousness wasn't meant to interface with. geological memory, time compressed into matter, light that remembers. I saw Margaret 3 days before they disappeared. She was luminous. Not metaphorically, I mean her skin emitted actual light, faint but measurable. I pretended not to notice. I was polite. I was a coward. What I should have done: believed her when she said they were being developed. Understood that some transformations can't be stopped, only witnessed. And then, after witnessing, had the courage to warn others. Do not photograph what the earth keeps hidden. Do not shine light on memories that predate human evolution. Do not dig up compressed time and expect it to behave like ordinary rock. The seal on the Arbuckle mine wasn't to prevent escape. It was to prevent exposure. They knew. The mining company knew. They struck a vein of something older than coal, older than the forests that became coal, older than the concept of light and dark as separate states. And once exposed, it photographs everything, archives everything, makes everything permanent in a record that exists outside human time. The Millers aren't dead. They're filed, stored, permanently exposed. Don't look for them. Don't try to retrieve them. Some images can't be deleted. The archivist resealed the envelope, placed it back in the box, updated the catalog with a single word: restricted. He quit 6 months later, moved to Florida. Never explained why. A pattern interrupt arrives via academic journal, though few read it. The Journal of Parapsychological Studies, Fall 2016, contains an article titled "Photographic Hauntings and Persistent Luminescence in Appalachian Folk Tradition." The author, Dr. Sarah Chen from Cornell, examines 53 documented cases between 1895 and 2010 where families reported anomalous light phenomena associated with photography. The Miller case occupies 3 paragraphs. Dr. Chen notes the lack of physical evidence but includes testimony from 14 Lewisburg residents who remember the family, remember the rumors, remember the military trucks in October 1954. She concludes, whether literal or symbolic, the Miller narrative represents a cultural anxiety about documentation, the fear that being photographed is being captured, trapped, transformed from subject to object, from human to image. She's correct about the anxiety, incorrect about the metaphor. The Millers weren't transformed into images. They were developed by images, by light that carried memory, by exposure to something that records at the atomic level and never stops recording. Her article receives 4 citations in 7 years. Academic interest fades. The case returns to folklore, which is exactly where it functions best, in the realm of story, where truth and fiction blur, where nobody is required to act, to intervene, to accept responsibility for what happened to 3 people who glowed in photographs. Documentation is consent. October 17th, 2024. A woman named Sarah Miller, no relation, just coincidence, visits Greenbrier County while researching her genealogy. She's heard the story. Everyone researching West Virginia Millers eventually hears the story. She doesn't believe it, but she's curious, thorough, the kind of person who fact-checks family legends before dismissing them. She drives to the property at noon, parks on the shoulder, walks into the field of silver grass with her iPhone and her rational skepticism and her complete certainty that cameras in 2024 are sophisticated enough to document anything reality offers. She takes 12 photographs, posts 3 to Instagram with the caption, "Creepy local legend spot, supposedly haunted by a family that glowed. Looks pretty normal to me." West Virginia, Dakjastar Urban Legends, Dakjastar Folklore Friday. The post receives 43 likes, 8 comments. Standard engagement. That night, Sarah reviews the photos more carefully. In the background of image 7, the one she doesn't remember taking, 3 figures stand at the tree line. Blurry, distant, haloed. She zooms in. The figures become less distinct, not more, as if clarity itself resists magnification, as if they exist in a resolution that predates digital photography, something captured on older emulsion, printed on paper that doesn't exist anymore. She deletes the image, empties her phone's trash folder, checks her iCloud backup, and finds it deleted there too. But every time she closes her eyes now, she sees them. Thomas, Margaret, David, watching from a distance measured not in feet, but in decades. Waiting with the patience of light that has already reached its destination and simply needs observers to catch up. Sarah doesn't return to Greenbrier County, doesn't finish her genealogy project, sells her iPhone and buys a basic flip phone without a camera. She tells friends she's detoxing from social media. They believe her because the alternative, that she's afraid of what she might photograph next, is absurd. But every October 17th, on the anniversary of her visit, her new phone screen glows faintly at 11:37 p.m. No notifications, no messages, just luminescence, pulsing in rhythm with something she can't identify and won't acknowledge. What would you do if you understood, really understood, that some things photograph you back? That observation is reciprocal, that the act of documenting can become the act of being documented, stored, filed in archives maintained by geology itself? Most people never face this question. Most people take their photographs and move on, never knowing that somewhere in the substrate of light and matter and time, every image leaves a mark that outlasts the photographer. The Millers faced it, couldn't escape it, became it. And now they wait in permanent exposure, fixed in solution that will never fade, in negatives that will never decay, in a record that exists outside the jurisdiction of human time. The house is gone, the fence is gone, the military left no documentation, the government maintains no file, but the land remembers, silver grass remembers. And if you stand in that field at the right angle to the sun, at the right hour of the right October day, you'll see 3 shadows that don't correspond to any object currently casting them. They're not shadows, they're exposures. The light has moved on, but the image remains. The final development. Locals report that entering the field still causes camera malfunctions, even phone cameras, even in 2024. The grass has been tested for radioactivity, for chemical contamination, for any conventional explanation. Every test comes back clean. The silver coloration has no botanical source. It simply is, the way certain things are when they've been permanently photographed by something older than human sight. And on still nights, when the air pressure drops and the ridge fog settles thick enough to mute the sound of the highway 3 miles north, people driving past report seeing lights in the empty field. 3 of them, circling slowly, 18 inches off the ground, bright as halogen lamps, but casting no illumination. If you stop to investigate, the lights vanish. If you try to photograph them, your camera fails. If you ignore them and keep driving, they follow your car for exactly 1 mile before disappearing at the county line, as if obeying boundaries established by something other than human administration. The story persists. The phenomenon persists. And somewhere in the compressed geology of Greenbrier County, the Miller family persists, not as ghosts, not as memories, but as permanent images in a photograph that's still developing, that will always be developing, that cannot stop developing until light itself forgets how to remember. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.